Welcome to another episode of the Impossible Life Podcast. I'm your co-host, Nick Surface, and I'm looking across at a man who's writing a future best-selling advice book that will contain 25 chapters that are only 2 words each. That's right, friends, the former Navy SEAL. Garrett Unkelbach, a man who knows that brevity is an art form. And incidentally, his book titled Really Good Advice Book is coming out later this year at retailers everywhere. Highlights include Chapter 10 titled Stop It. That's also all the words in the book. And Chapter 17 titled Be Better. So, just to give you a little bit of a preview about what's coming out from Garrett.
I love it.
Yeah, well, it's because it's massively accurate.
It would be extremely beneficial for anyone who read it.
So you may be listening to this going like, wait, what? That's because Garrett will employ Stop It as like a really great piece of advice on a lot of things. Like, let's say I'm feeling sick and I'm coughing. He'll just look at me and be like, stop it. Hey, great advice. Changed my life instantly better. So thank you.
Don't drop your phone.
Yeah, don't. Just
Stop
really.
it.
Sometimes you can just say less, right? That's like your philosophy in life.
Stop it.
Yeah, great. Well, I love it.
People, they start like confessing. Oh man, I just like have this issue and I keep doing this thing. Like, don't.
Yeah, can you? Yeah. Well, how do I don't? No, just don't. Yeah. Well, great. Anyways, that's the end of the podcast, everybody. We hope you have a great day. We're going to take that intro and just make it a whole thing. No, today's is a great one, man. I'm really looking forward to this. This is 3 tests that every man will face, and really every man or woman is going to face these things. But we are very much have a heart for men, so we said 3 tests that every man will face, and we're going to dive into that. If you're watching us on YouTube, you may notice that I look like I maybe got into a fight with a cat. I assure you that I did not. I went and saw one of our friends.
Nick wouldn't be my friend if he had a cat.
Dude, I feel that way about cats too, man.
Sorry if you're a cat person.
No, I'm all dog. But, I could go
all dog for
dude,
sure.
That is like a massive left turn I could take, and I'm going to go ahead and
funny story.
Oh, here we go.
Funny story. Pastor Keith is allergic to cats. And so my parents had a cat when they became friends, and then they didn't have a cat anymore.
Wow, that's real friendship right there, man.
It is real friendship.
And you know what? They made the right choice because here we are 40 years later, and that was a good choice. But anyways, like I was saying, I did not get into a fight with a cat. I actually had this sunspot. For those of you guys that watched on YouTube, I used to have this sunspot right here that one of our listeners who's local, Rosa, at Skinslayer, removed for me. And so I went back and had a little bit more stuff because, you want to make sure your skin looks nice.
I love her business name.
Yeah, Skinslayer. Yeah, Rosa's awesome. She does all natural stuff. She removed, it was quick and painless. Anyways, I'm going to link to it in the show notes. If you're in DFW area and you have anything like that, she removed a couple skin tags for me as well. She's amazing. And I just wanted to say I appreciate her.
Old.
Yeah, well, bro, you know what? Guess what? I'm looking at your skin while I'm sat across from you, and I might send you to Rosa as well. So you can say whatever you want.
Better lock it up, bro.
Yeah, I'm not going to lock anything up because while we're recording, I feel like I'm somewhat safe. Anyways, let's move on, G. So 3 tests every man face. Here's an interesting one, Garrett. So have you ever heard of Eric Wayenmeyer?
I have not.
Okay. Well, this guy on May 21st, 2001 summited Mount Everest. He's also
Cool guy.
Yeah. He's also completed the 7 summits in September of 2002. He's one of only 150 mountaineers at the time to do so. Like, think about what a rare class you're in at that. He's also
sure.
In 2008, he added the Karstens Pyramid, which is the 8th summit. They've added that in. I wasn't aware of that, but that's the 8th summit that they've added in. He's made noteworthy climbs, like he climbed the nose of El Capitan, which if you've watched,
nice.
if you've watched, what's that movie where they had free solo? Was that El Capitan? Yeah. And he's also ascended Losar, which is a 2,700 foot vertical ice face in the Himalayas in 2008.
Dang.
So this dude has done a lot of stuff. Oh, and by the way, he's the only person that's ever done it.
If it's vertical, he can climb it.
Yeah, but he's also the only person that's done all those things that's blind. This dude,
I thought I'd heard of this guy before.
He of all those things, he's the only person that's ever been blind. He was on the cover of Time magazine as a result of it. And just, you talk about like overcoming the impossible. Listen to how he did this. So he had this technology which translated images from a camera into vibrations on the tip of his tongue so he can sense what's around him.
It's like Daredevil.
It is like Daredevil. This guy is
awesome.
He's the real life Daredevil. But think about that. Like, we're talking about 3 tests that everybody must face, and we're going to get into how this guy has shown that he's passed all those tests. But imagine how many people must have been like, okay, so you want to do what now? Oh, and all the things he would have heard. Hey, a lot of people die.
Oh, that's kind of dangerous.
Yeah, what if the cameras don't work? What if you...
People who can see die up there. Why do you think you could do it?
Well, and very good points, right? I mean, you use, I want to say Sir Roger Bannister, but that's not the right guy. Who's my guy that climbs Everest, man? I completely blanked.
Edmund Hillary.
Thank you, Sir Edmund Hillary. I knew it was one of the Sirs.
There's a few. They start to all blend together in your mind, the Sirs.
In my mind, they do, G. But he was one of the guys that encouraged you to go for it in SEAL training. And this guy is going like, oh, Sir Edmund Hillary, I'm going to do what he did. That was once thought impossible, and I'm going to do it blind. Unbelievable example. So he employed and overcame all the tests, and we're gonna get into what those tests are. We're gonna talk about what the tests are, what the lessons are. Like, this is for all you out there that are seeking to grow and live the impossible life, which I believe is every person listening to this.
That you have a dream, that there's something that you feel like you want to do or accomplish.
That's exactly right. This is an episode for you. Unfortunately, we've both done a lot of things in our life and we continue to pursue, but you've done something that's a little bit rare.
I will say, yeah, on your journey to do something great, you will encounter some things that I call not in the brochure.
Yeah.
If you are younger than me and you listen to this podcast, you might not be very familiar with brochures.
Yeah.
But for the rest of us,
Hold on. Not on the website. There you go.
yeah. For the rest of that's good. For the rest of us, brochures have been around for a long time. They are little pamphlets that people would hand you as an advertisement of here's what you can expect. You'd get a brochure for a vacation, right? And when someone handed you the proverbial brochure for your dream,
Oh, yeah.
brochures show all the great things. Here's all the cool stuff you're going to do. And there actually was a brochure in my recruiter's office for the SEAL teams.
Oh, really?
Right. There was a Navy brochure. There was a SEAL teams brochure. And it shows you all like the sickest stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Jumping out of planes, riding in boats, shooting guns, blowing stuff up. Like, awesome.
Like, sign me up.
Right. I want to do that.
Yeah.
I want to be one of those guys. Right. Give me my stuff. And so I say that to say, on your dream, there's going to be plenty of things that were not in the brochure, because I got to do all the things that were in the brochure.
Yeah.
But I got to do a lot of things that were not in the brochure. I remember this was my first cycle in the SEAL teams, and we're training in this place out in east of San Diego. It's the desert. We called it Nyland, the Salton Sea area, if you're familiar with Southern California. And we're out there, and we shot millions of rounds over a couple weeks. And then apparently, somehow, the Navy had been influenced by the hippies, that we needed to pick up this brass from this total wasteland because it was bad for the environment.
Nice.
Right? Like, there's just miles. I never saw a living creature when we were out there. People aren't supposed to exist in this place.
Right.
It is a wasteland, right?
Yeah.
It was hard for us to live there. It was so hot.
You're
all the time.
training for. Yeah.
Literally, the soles melted off of multiple pairs of shoes I had there.
Oh my gosh.
Right? Like, I'm running and the soles of my shoes detach from the shoe because they got so hot.
Like, full detach?
Yes, they came off. Like, I'm running, it's so hot.
Yeah.
Like, your feet are burning out there. The ground is so hot.
Dude.
So, anyways, the hippies said that we got to pick up our brass out here, and so there we were. Me and my shorts and my tank top, and the rest of my team just listening to music, picking up brass for days.
Right.
After we just shot all of it, and I just remember thinking to myself, like, this was not in the brochure.
I'm guessing they didn't tell you, hey, by the way, every round you fire off, you're going to have to pick up the casing for it later.
I might have held back on a few of those machine gun bursts.
I can imagine you guys just pop it off like, this is great. And then they're like, oh, hey, guess what, guys? Go clean up.
Might have held back on a few of those machine gun bursts.
Exactly. But that is like the reason I wanted you to tell that story, that's like a microcosm for life right there. It told
There's
in
every dream that you go after. Every person I've ever talked to who's been on a great journey and done something special, they can tell you the stuff that wasn't in the brochure.
Right.
And unfortunately, there's people who quit at those. They're like, oh, well, I guess this isn't what I thought.
Yeah. And that's the whole reason why we want to do this episode, is because we don't want you to be surprised. Like, look, there's always going to be surprises, but part of this is just having an expectation of being like, this is not going to go how I think it is.
Those things that aren't in the brochure, they make you ask this question: why am I having to do this?
Yeah.
Right? Or shouldn't somebody else?
Right.
Why do I have to do it?
Yeah.
And you've got to look at it, and that's also an expectation that things are fair.
Right.
That's also an expectation that there was like this special road journey that's protected for you, that was prepared for you.
Yeah.
The road is not prepared for you. You have to make the road.
Very good. Yeah, the pathway to success is not a sidewalk. It's an uncarved journey through the woods. You better bring your machete.
You're a pioneer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you know what? Sometimes you're going to chop down a tree with a beehive in it.
Yeah, they're very good. Yeah, we could keep going on this analogy. And then that beehive's going to stick. No, I'm just kidding. So going to this. So the start, like we said, is you desire. You're going to grow, right? Like, you desire something, and you understand that all growth requires change. And so you have to have this thought process. You love the T-shirts out there that say, I am enough. And when I say I love, they like literally you loathe
By love,
them.
I mean the opposite.
Yeah, you loathe those shirts. And so the thought process is, I am not yet. right? And that is the thought process when you're heading out, is you understand the person that you are that day is not the person you're going to be whenever you actually accomplish what you're setting out to do. And if you don't take stock of that, you're going to hit a lot of those moments where you start to question, well, why am I having to do this? It shouldn't be like this. And once you say it shouldn't be like this, you're revealing an underlying belief.
You're building up your platform to jump off and quit.
Exactly right. Because now it's a belief that, well, no, this isn't how it's supposed to be. I'm doing something wrong, or something's owed to me, like you said. And it's like, well, I better try something different.
It matters a great deal, the things that you disregard.
Right. Big time. Yeah.
Right.
Big time.
And when you're preparing to quit, when you give a lot of credence to these things that weren't in the brochure, when you give a lot of credence to the discouragement, when you give a lot of credence to the failures,
Yep.
right? Just like we've talked about before, we use the simple analogy of people who think they're lucky and people who think they're not.
Right.
I consider myself a very lucky person. And when I don't win something, I find that strange.
Right.
People who don't think they're lucky, they're quite the opposite.
Yeah.
When they don't win, they're like, yep, that's just how it is. I never win anything. Right? It matters a great deal what you disregard.
Yeah, I completely agree. So, this comes down to the estimation word, right? And we talk about how Jesus talked about count the cost. Nobody who goes out to build a tower doesn't stop and count the cost, right? And he gives a simple analogy. Well,
That does require an estimation ability.
It does.
One of the things they trained us really well at in the military, because you have to be precise at it. You have to be very precise at your ability to estimate time. Right? Don't say you can be on target at 11:37
right.
and get there at 11:45.
Now, Garrett's saying these things and you think he's saying random times. This is something that amuses me about you to no end. So sometimes I'll say, hey, like we do live events here. We do the fire starter and different things. And I'll say, gee, how long do you think that's going to take? And because of what he just said to
12
you,
minutes.
That's exactly right. Every other person you talk to would either say 10 or 15 because people go in fives. Garrett will be like, it'll take us exactly 17 minutes. Depends, maybe if this goes longer than 18 or I could do it in 16. I'm like, okay. Like, it's a blessing because you're actually very accurate about it, but it's also very amusing. Now, most people...
Well, to me, that's like saying, how far is it, 100 yards or 200 yards?
Yeah.
It's neither. It's 147, right? When you practice that ability, you learn how to do that.
Exactly right. But I'm making a point here, G. So, before you give me the intensity.
I'm giving a lesson.
Yeah, okay. Well, hey, we're both doing the same thing, just in different ways, which is what makes this work, I think. Anyways, but the point I was making is that people are really bad at estimation. And when I say estimation, I don't just mean like we're talking about time. Oh, there you go, chapter 25 again. I don't just mean time. Like we see this all the time. We were talking about this beforehand. People will be late for things, and they'll be like, "Well, why are you late?" Oh man, well,
when they tell you they're 10 minutes away, they're 5 minutes away from being 15 minutes away.
That's exactly right. Oh, anytime someone says I'll be there in 10 minutes, I'm like, no, you won't. Because if you're saying you're going to be there in 10 minutes,
how sad that's what our culture's.
That's an optimistic viewpoint.
To.
That's an optimistic viewpoint. And it's because people are thinking, oh, well, I can make up time here, or we misunderstand how long it's going to take us to do something. Oh, I only need 5 minutes for a shower. No, you don't. Dude,
the Navy taught me how to shower in 5 minutes, and that consists of you being in the shower for about 30 seconds.
Exactly right. Well, Garrett once said to me, I could shower and get myself ready, including doing my hair in one breath. In one breath hold.
And I know that because I've done it.
See what this is like the special skills podcast today. Like we're going to list all the quirky things that you have on your list, which we're going to be here for a while.
I did it one time when I was really in a hurry, and I was like, how I could get this done really fast? If I hold my breath.
Oh, so you've proved, okay.
It'll make you go faster.
The thing that's so funny is I actually didn't know you had done it. I thought you were saying hypothetical. So this is me learning live on the podcast, which I appreciate that as your friend.
When you're
it's also hilarious.
And when you're a little crazy, sometimes the hypotheticals become, curious reality tests.
Dude, I love that you've actually done that. I'm going to bring that up when we're not recording because that's amazing. But the point I was making is if we're that bad at estimating time, how many other things in your life are you misestimating, right? And I will tell you, we could go through the list of things, but think about when you estimate the energy you're going to show up with for something that's at the end of a very busy week that's really important.
It's a super important, not just for life. Like, you don't have to be able to estimate how long it's going to take you to get ready or how long it's going to take you to get your makeup on. As a business owner, forecasting and estimation is one of the most critical skills. How much money are you going to make next quarter?
Yeah.
How good are you at it? Is it 100 or 200?
Right.
Well, if that's your if that's your unit of measure that broad, you're probably not going to get it right.
Right. And a lot of people would just say as much as possible. And there's a fault in that as well, because then you can start to burn yourself the other way, and then you're creating a whole nother set of problems for yourself. Like Garrett is 100% right. Estimation in business matters. It matters in your life. There's a whole list of things that we could go into. But the point was,
Maybe we'll do a separate podcast on that.
maybe we should. Hey, we might have got another podcast idea. But the point is that people don't plan for obstacles, right? It's like, yes, you could get there in 15 minutes if traffic is perfect, you never catch a red light, and you actually get ready and get out the door in the 2 minutes that you gave for it. But here's what's actually going to happen. You're going to forget where your keys are at. Then you're going to realize you wanted to bring coffee with you. Then you're going to spill the coffee. Then you're going to have to go back and change. And now you're 10 minutes late. Then you're going to be gunning it everywhere. You're going to get pulled over for getting a ticket because you ran that red light. And actually, you've showed up 45 minutes after you said you were. And that's how it actually looks in life, all because we don't plan. So the whole point of this podcast, and you alluded to it last week, that we should do the 3 tests, which is why we're doing this week, is don't be surprised. We're going to give you an idea of what's coming.
One little just small comment on getting there on time.
Here we go.
I think one of the things in our culture that has made people so perpetually late is because people used to get places early, right? Because they realized there's so many things they couldn't count on, right? And so people would plan to get places very earlier. And in 100 years ago, 200 years ago, that early wasn't 5 minutes early. It was a day early. Right. Because if they had a meeting, they're like, well, what if my horse dies? Right. Like, well, it'll take me a while to get another horse. So people would arrive very early. The reason I think so many people today struggle to show up on time is because the thought of arriving early and not knowing what to do with that time is scary for them. Right, being alone with your thoughts, that idle time is like, man, what would I do if I had to, just sit there for 5 minutes and wait for the meeting to start?
Dude, so now I have a little bit of a bone to pick with this, because I do this on purpose for exactly what you said. I get that we have stuff to do on our phones, but like I travel, you travel. I make a point of when I'm traveling of not just mindlessly scrolling on my phone. So when I'm sitting at the gate waiting for my plane, or even when I'm on the plane, I don't just like sit there and just start scrolling through Instagram, because I'm like, there's such a great time to be alone with your thoughts and to actually, some of the greatest things I've written in my life, like I wrote my vision statement, a lot of my I wants, when I was on a plane, because I realized I could guarantee no interruptions. And we miss this all the time because we're just feeding our brains and giving it no quiet time. I would encourage you, next time you're in the car, maybe, unless it's this podcast, don't put, or some worship music, don't put stuff on. Sit there quietly and just see what happens, what your brain does. It'll process information. It's good for you. All right, so let's get to the 3 tests that every man's going to face. But I want to give you a story real quick about some advice I received from an unlikely source that relates to this really, really well.
Okay.
I've done a lot of stuff in sports, and I've met some very famous people.
That's why I call you Sportsman.
I know. I appreciate that.
You are like my sports friend. If I have a sports question, I just ask you.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure whether to say thank you for that, but I'm going to go ahead and say thank you.
Or I see something on the internet and I ask you, I'm like, is this true? Do you know who this guy is? And you usually have more to tell me about this person.
Oh, that reminds me. I've got a good Tiger Woods story for you when we get off the air. So yes, I am your sports friend. But so I get to be around some pretty high level people in various sports. And years ago, I was at dinner, and I'm not going to say who it was because there's people out there who would know, with one of the best goal scorers that's ever played in the Premier League, and a guy who was also at one point pretty high up in a club called Tottenham Hotspur, which if you follow soccer, you know exactly what that club is. They're
for all of our
club.
UK listeners.
Yeah, which we do have plenty of them. I would say if you like soccer in the world, you know who the Hotspurs are. So I'm out to dinner, and this guy actually told me during the dinner, he's like, I'm not a good person. And he proceeded to tell me.
Nice.
That was his accent.
Who opens with that?
Well, this guy, he did not have a high level of care of what I or anybody else thought about him. And he would share some stories about some of the bad things he did. And yeah, there's a lot more I could say that I will never say publicly. Well, anyways, as he was talking to me, I'm sitting there going, man, this is, you don't get to be at a dinner like this.
I don't want to be here.
There was the 3 of us, and I was just sitting there like, this is incredible. Like some of the stuff that was coming out, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm just filing this away in my brain. Like I'm going to tell some stories about this one day. Well, this guy said to me, and he was also very rich. I was definitely the poorest guy at the table. These guys were both multi-millionaires. And I remember he said to me, he's like, everybody thinks that success is like this. And he drew like a hockey stick and like just going straight up. He's like, let me tell you what it's really like. And he started making his hands up and down like it was a bunch of mountains. He's like, that's what happens. And you have your highs and your lows, but eventually your highs get higher and your lows get lower, or your lows get higher as well, but you still have them. And in all that was like one golden nugget that I took away of being like, okay, because while I did not have a lot of respect for the way this guy lived his life, he had seen, done, and accomplished some things that very few people in the planet ever will. And so I remember walking away from that and going like, man, there was a whole rest of that story where I got absolutely ripped off because I had to pick up the tab. So he stuck me with the bill as well. But fortunately it was an expense account. But it still hurt. But that was a piece that I've always carried with me. And that's what these highs and lows are, is these 3 tests. So G, very first test, because I know this is something that you compiled. It's discouragement, and we can all relate to that.
First test that every man is going to have to pass is to defy discouragement.
Yeah.
I went through a great deal of this in my own story, which many of you who listen to this show have listened to it. If not, maybe you'll go back to whatever episode number that was and hear my personal story, that I went through a great deal of discouragement. Starting with, the guy who recruited me into the Navy.
Yeah.
Told me I was the most arrogant kid he'd ever met, and it didn't get any better from there. Each phase and group of people that I went on to, there were key characters in each setting, in each place that I was in, that made it a point, which was strange. Like I felt very singled out by someone in each of these different phases who would tell me, like, you don't belong here. You specifically, you don't have a chance here. What would make you think that you would have a place here? Mm-hmm. And I was just continually discouraged. David in the Bible, this is his own story, right? When the prophet comes to David's family looking for the next king, right? His own father's like, oh, great, let me get all my sons.
Yeah.
And doesn't even summon David.
Imagine that.
Right? The prophet looks at all the other sons, and says, like, wait, is this everybody?
Yeah.
Because God's given me the ability to see which one of these men would be king. And I've looked at all your sons and I don't see the king. Is this everyone?
Yeah.
He's like, oh yeah, I do have this other son, but he's a shepherd boy. He's out in the fields. And that's 1 Samuel 16. The scripture says that God does not see the same way that people see. Mm. People look at the outside of a person, but the Lord looks at the heart.
Yeah.
What a honestly terrible way to have to start your story, that your own father didn't even find you good enough to be considered.
Yeah. And how many people can relate to that out there, where you've got words in your head from your father? Or
right. Whether it's a father or your mother or a teacher or just a person who had influence in your life, who you would hope and think cared for you, believed in you, would at least, say, well, son, I hope you do well.
Yeah.
Right. Here's your shot. Go see what you do with it. Let alone that they would love you, believe in you, encourage you.
Yeah.
That at least wouldn't get in your way. And David had to overcome that. And I can tell you, for every single person who's listening to this podcast, whatever your dream is, whatever your journey is, whatever path you're on, you're going to face a great deal of discouragement. Mm. People are going to look at you and they'll say, you have no chance here. Right? People will look at you and they'll when you tell them what your dream is, they'll say, oh yeah, somebody could do that, but not you.
Right.
People will look at you and say, oh man, I think you're great, but I don't think you could do that. When you start telling people about the business that you're going to build, when you start telling people about the dream that you have, about the family that you're going to have, you're going to have to overcome discouragement. And that's Galatians chapter 6, verse 9. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time, we will reap a harvest if we do not give up, right? You're going to have to keep going beyond the discouragement. Don't get weary in that. And the lesson in this test, right? Everyone is going to have to pass this test if you want to make it onto your greatness. And the lesson is that in this test is that not everyone will see your greatness.
Yeah.
Nick likes to tell this story of my best friend Josh, who says about me, he says that Garrett saw it before anyone else did.
Yeah.
Right? Like, a lot of people saw something in me, but they didn't see what I saw.
Right.
I saw the unique gifts and abilities that God had given me. Everybody else saw just this crazy guy.
Yeah.
Right?
And
go ahead.
I was going to say, you said the lesson is to not expect others to see it. And here's the caveat to that. And you can't hold it against them that they don't. Because otherwise you'll be the other guy going like, I told you so, and rubbing it in people's faces, and you'll miss out on a whole host of other opportunities to help them grow as well. And that's the real challenge, especially if it's been somebody that's loved you, that was supposed to love you, and they didn't love you well. If you got your own parents,
they'll all come back around.
Exactly.
Just like my recruiter did.
Exactly right.
My recruiter came back and told me, he said, man, I always knew you'd make it. He never said it back then.
Right.
But that's the way he felt about it.
Yeah.
And it's probably is true.
Yeah.
right? He never made me feel that way.
Yeah.
But maybe he did think like, man, I don't know, that kid's kind of different.
Well, it's Joseph's brothers. Imagine
Right.
if he'd been like, I told you, let's execute them. Well, like, that wouldn't be a very good story, and he would have missed out on the real reason God had him there. And that's why
Right.
I'm highlighting that. Like, you need to understand people are going to speak things into you, whether they have influence in your life or not, and you have to expect it.
So where you would fall down in this is seeking validation
Right.
from other people.
Yeah, very much so.
If I had been looking to be validated before I moved on in SEAL training, I would have never moved on.
Right.
I learned this lesson, so interesting for me. The last like year and a half I was in the Navy, I spent a lot of time in an organization mentoring students to help them get into the Navy. And some of that was out of first SEALs I ever met were my instructors. I never had a mentor. You're supposed to have a SEAL mentor in your area, like the Navy creates this, where there's guys who are over certain regions. And the SEAL for this region where we live in DFW had actually been, he was still in the reserves and had been recalled.
Oh, right.
And so he got called back and they didn't replace him with anybody. And so I just never had a SEAL mentor,
I mentored myself.
essentially. Right. And so out of that, like I really had a heart to help prepare
Yeah.
guys to get into the Navy. And I spent a lot of time mentoring guys. And eventually they all asked the same question. Whether it's after 2 weeks, some of them could really hold it in and they'd wait 6 months to ask me. But they would all ask me the same question. They would say, do you think I'll make it? And my answer to all of them was the same. I would say, if my answer to that question matters to you, you probably won't make it.
What a great answer, man.
And they're just like looking at me with their
Yeah.
mouth open. And then I'd say, in fact, all the time that we've spent together actually has no bearing on whether or not you'll make it. And then they're really looking at me with their eyes open and their mouth open. And I'll say, here's why we've been spending time together, right? My goal has been to make you more of a man,
Right.
because most of you will quit.
Yeah.
Most of you won't actually make it. And when you quit on your dream, you're going to have to be a man to deal with that, because whatever God's made you for, it's made you for something. And I don't want you, if you're a little boy, when you quit on what you think is your dream, you won't be able to move on to the thing that God actually has for you. And for the few of you that actually are going to make it onto the SEAL teams, I want you to show up as a better man there. So I'm making an investment. For most of you, I'm making an investment in you personally. And for the few of you, I'm making an investment in the future of the SEAL teams.
That's so good.
Right. But all of them, they were looking for that ounce of validation.
Right.
Which is fair. We all do it. Right. Who doesn't want, like someone that they look up to say like, oh, I believe in you. You're going to do great.
Of course.
Right. And I hope you have that. Whoever's listening to this on your journey to greatness, I hope you get that. I had a few people in my life that believed in me. They didn't necessarily say like, Garrett, I have all the authority to see who's going to be a SEAL and I think you'll make it.
Right.
I didn't have that, but I did have people who loved me and just generally believed in me, which helped me overcome the discouragement. But regardless of whether you get that or not, just know that other people, the majority of people, will not see the greatness that's in you, and you're going to have to move forward regardless.
Yeah, and one of the things that you did to overcome yours, and that every single person out here needs to be able to do as well, is you had encouragers in your life, but when you're getting beat down in buds, they weren't stood there. And you've talked about, you could see your dad on the berm, and you
right.
had these things. So what were you? You were a great encourager of yourself, and that's one of the things that you have to learn to do in any greatness journey. Is you have to understand you're going to face discouragement, and if you can't encourage yourself in those moments, you're never going to get past it. And you're never going to earn the right to encourage others.
Encouragement is a nice to have.
Right.
If encouragement is a need
Right.
for you, you will be relegated to zones. Relegated is stuck. Relegated is moved backwards. You will be relegated to zones where there are people that believe in you.
Yeah, very
Right?
true.
And to get to the place that God has for you, you're going to have to go through some deserts.
Very good, G. Real quick, because I do want to move on to number 2, but we talked about when we were preparing that any discouragement is always obstacle focused. And I want to highlight that because you'll notice that we're not going into all the different scenarios where discouragement could show up, but there really is two things that people say. They're either going to focus on the obstacle and remind you how big it is, which is going to put your focus on all the problems and all the things straight away.
Look, the discouragement's either going to be personal to you,
Right.
or personal to your obstacle.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, people will, or people, like, for example, your discouragement will sound one of two ways. They'll say, oh yeah, some people could do that, but I don't think you could.
Yeah.
Right. If your dream's like to join the NBA, they're like, oh yeah, the NBA, like there's people there, but you're not going to be one of them.
Yeah.
Or you have a dream that people maybe don't understand as much, and they'll say, well, man, I think you're so great, but Like, you think you could be a billionaire?
Right.
I don't know, man. Probably not you.
Yeah.
Right. When you have a really big dream, people will look at you and say, I think that's doable, but I don't think you can do it.
Right. All right, G. Well, I've overcome internal discouragement. I'm ready for the next test. Please tell me it's getting wealthy, right? That's the next test is wealth and health, right?
The second test that every man is going to have to pass after you defy discouragement, you're going to have to surpass limitations.
Dang it.
If you read David's story, and David's one of my favorite people to study in the Bible, and there's more written about David than anyone else in the Bible except Jesus. Only one person is written about more in the Bible than David, and that's Jesus. So,
Might want to pay attention.
yeah, God specifically put him as a central character in the Old Testament because he's someone that we can learn from, study and learn from. He's the person who God said he's a man after my own heart.
Yeah.
Right? And just like it said about David that the Lord looks at the heart, we should learn from someone who the Lord said, his heart is like mine.
Yeah.
Right? That's the type of person that we want to be.
For sure. Thank God we have the Psalms, by the way. Just as a note, if you're not reading Psalms and you
That's why you got to read Psalms. Proverbs is wisdom.
For sure.
Right? And but Psalms is the heart of a man who was like God.
Yeah, and what's amazing is because most of Proverbs was written by the son of the man who wrote Psalms, and you can see, like, sometimes you'll read almost verbatim the proverb in the Psalms, which I love that. So just a side note, read Psalms.
So everyone told David that he had no potential.
Yeah.
Right? He had his older brothers, right? Again, they thought he was prideful.
Yeah.
And so David had to deal with that. David stood before Saul, and Saul said, "Hey man, you're pretty tiny."
Yep.
Right? I don't know, like, he's a big dude and you're like less than average. What would make you think that, there's my dad always said, if the shoe fits, wear it.
Right.
Right? David had to wear that shoe.
For sure.
David was small. Right? And Goliath thought that David was unskilled. And you know what? He's not. Never been to war before. Right? Here's a young boy showing up on the battlefield. Doesn't have any combat experience. Now, granted, he's killed some lions and bears, but doesn't have any combat experience, doesn't have any weapons of war.
Right.
And so there's an ounce of truth in all of the things, right, that where David is discounted. His brother's thinking he's prideful. Well, he is claiming to do something that he doesn't necessarily have evidence of, right? So they could call that pride. You have to wear that shoe, even though it's not what was in David's heart, right? He was small. He didn't have combat experience. But here's what you got to understand about David. And all of these things, these are limitations that other people put on him. And this builds on top of the discouragement. People won't see the greatness that's in you. But here's what you need to understand. You believing in yourself is not the whole measure. Just because you think that you're great, just because you can overcome the discouragement, you actually have to surpass the limitations. You have to draw the greatness out of yourself. David didn't just say, like, hey, I'm a great warrior.
Yeah.
David went out there and killed Goliath, something that probably none of those other men could do.
Right.
Right. So he didn't just like, come on, guys, God's with me.
Yeah.
Right. He wasn't just a believer in himself. He brought the greatness out of himself. He had been through the years of preparation of overcoming discouragement. When David's father overlooked him, that was not the first. That wasn't like an epiphany, like, oh, my dad doesn't believe in me.
Right.
David didn't get called to family dinners.
Right.
Right. David was stuck in the field. He knew who he was.
Yeah.
He knew that he was basically a servant in his father's eyes.
Right.
Right. So he had dealt with this for a long time. And so there's a lot of preparation that happens after you decide to believe in yourself. You got to do the work to actually overcome the limitations. It's not just about believing in yourself, but it's developing yourself.
Yes.
And realizing, like, hey, you know what? There's some truth in what everyone says, right? Like, hey, I'm not that big. Okay. So I'm going to have to, like, really be great if I want to kill a giant because I'm smaller than the average guy. So the lesson in surpassing limitations is that there's more to you than meets the eye, right? There's more in you than what people can see. David's brothers didn't see it. Saul didn't see it. Goliath didn't see it, but you have to develop yourself and draw it out.
Yeah. What this looks like, what these thought processes will feel like to you whenever you're in this place is, man, I'm so frustrated. I should be farther along. I know I should be here. I should be making this much. My company should be X size. I should be doing this job. When you're starting to say things like should, It means that you've overcome the discouragement and you believe in yourself, but you're hitting some limitations that you can't see. And what I often find these are, a lot of times these are wisdom issues. This is stuff that you got to go figure out. My business has stopped growing. Okay, you're missing some details here. It's the work that you're not doing. It's the things that you're taking for granted. It's the areas of your life that you're allowing to be blind spots that you're refusing to look at, that you need to understand. There's more there for you, and you need to draw it out and you need to figure it out. And it's not necessarily a romantic or sexy thing, but like getting into the details of things and having the grit and the excellence to spend the time on them so that you can grow and figure those things out is really where you pass those limitations. Because I mean, G, you've experienced what it is to be able to do the uncommon things or do common things in an uncommon way, right? That's one of the things that you always talk about in the SEAL teams is like, everybody has uniform regs in the military, right? Everybody has shooting standards in the military. Everybody has battlefield tactics. You guys were just at a level that most people never even dream of pursuing. And that's what I'm talking about when I say surpass limitations, is to really do the work and draw it out. That's what we're saying. All right, G. So I've overcome discouragement. And by the way, discouragement's internal. Limitations are literal external things. And in case you missed it, Garrett talked about everything that was said about David. You could go, shoe fits.
Yep.
It's accurate. Like, he's probably right.
Yeah, that's going to be you in your season for a long time.
Right.
Where people are like, yeah, you're not the guy.
Yeah, your
right?
business
and there's evidence that says you're not the guy.
Right. Look at your marriage. Like, that's just the way it is. Like, your kids, it's too late. Like,
You've been trying for 5 years and haven't made $1.
Right. Yeah. What are you doing? Like, that's what this feels like, to surpass limitations. Just so you all know, that's the voice of it. So I've overcome the external limitations, G. I've got internal discouragement.
Number 2 is a long season.
Do I get to retire now? Is that next?
No, you don't.
Dang it.
Because if you're going to be great, it's not about you.
Right. Very good. We're going to start the retirement podcast, and it's going to have no episodes.
So the surpass limitations this season is a really long season. You're going to be here for a while.
Yeah.
Right. But once you get there, once you've done it, and this is also cyclical, right? You'll surpass limitations, so to speak, in maybe who your parents were and then who you are, right? You'll set some new ground, some new template for your family, right? And that's great. And you surpassed those limitations, so to speak, and you'll continue to go through cycles of defy discouragement, surpass limitations. And then
I'm glad you said that, because these are not like steps across a river where you're just like, well, that's done. Really take note. You're going to face discouragement the rest of your life. It's always going to be on hand. So I'm glad you said that.
It's a continuing cycle.
Very good.
Right. But the third step after you surpass limitations is to set the example.
Yeah.
Right. There's a story that I love in Judges chapter 6 of Gideon, and I'll tell the really, really short story. All of God's people have, not all, but most of God's people have gone astray, and they're doing the wrong thing. And Gideon, basically an angel speaks to him, and he gets a spark of courage.
Yeah.
And he goes into the middle of the town. This is in a place where people they've drifted from God. And he burns down the Asherah pole, which is their device of worshiping foreign gods. He burns it down, and everyone's like, "You're going to get us in trouble with Baal. You're the enemy." But when he did that, right, it set a fire in everyone else to realize, like, yeah, we got to get away from this stuff. We got to come back to God, right? He did something that wasn't necessarily for him, but it was for everyone else, and he knew he had to break this chain over the people, over God's people, so that they could be free. And for every person that surpasses limitations, when I talked about this lesson before, I said that the hardest test that every man will pass, and it's this third test, the hardest test that every man will pass is a test that doesn't benefit him, right? When you set the example, it's for your children. It's for the next generation. It's for the people who are coming behind you. It's for the people that you disciple. When you surpass limitations, hey, you can check the box, you can ring the bell, you're done. You did it. It's gravy. You got the gold, right? You can go home. But if you really want greatness for your life, you realize that it's not about you.
Right.
You've got to do the final part, which is set the example for other people. Who should set the example? The people who know what it takes to win.
Right.
The people who know what it takes to follow God. The people who know what kind of standards actually lead to excellence versus what kind of standards lead to taking laps. Right? It's the people who've been there before. And so once you surpass limitations, you got to be someone who's going to continue to pay that price, right? This test doesn't benefit you. It benefits the people around you. It benefits your family. It benefits your children. Benefits your friends. And if you're selfish, you'll get to the end of your life and realize that all the stuff you did for yourself didn't really matter.
Yeah.
But what's beautiful and wonderful, what greatness looks like, is that when you've conquered enemies, when you've killed giants, and you go back and teach other people how to do it, and you get to watch others walk into their destiny and walk into their greatness because of the example that you set, that's when you realize that you're a blessed man.
What I love about that last one, G, that's a real mature thought process. Like you got to earn test number 3. I feel like discouragement and limitations, unless you want to be nothing, do nothing, and say nothing, you're going to face those in one form or another. But the maturity thought process that brings about a legacy thought like what you just shared, that's one that you really have to earn. And you're right. I mean, there's so many examples of people who have died and taken all that they accomplished with them because they never learned the one lesson of it's not about you.
The lesson of this third test, the lesson of set the example, is that you have to live the standard even after you've reaped the fruit of it. Right? That's for if you're living just for the fruit, once you get the fruit, it's like, finally, don't have to do that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, to me, like I've always just had this thought of like being a fat seal.
Right.
Right? Like what would it say of not just my legacy, but of the Navy SEALs legacy? It was like, man, this guy is one of those dudes, and now look at him, right? Like fat and out of shape, can't even do anything anymore.
Yeah.
Right? It degrades the legacy. It degrades the greatness that God's put in you. That if after you've finally been through journey after journey, desert after desert, mountain peak after mountain peak, and you figure it out, that you keep it all to yourself.
Yeah. Man, I that's so good. I hope everybody's seeing why we're talking about these because as always on this podcast, we try and give you guys some specific examples to help you picture it in your own life, but you're going to have to recognize these things because discouragement, limitations, and standards are going to be something that they're going to be the test that you face. And if you don't recognize those in your life, I promise you can just go right past them and just, run through the red light and just keep going and miss the whole lesson. So just to say again, G, can you give us the test and the lesson one more time just to kind of summarize for everybody?
Yeah, test number 1 is to defy discouragement. And the lesson is that not everyone will see your greatness, right? They're not going to see it. You know what matters? That you see it.
Yep.
You just got to see what God gave you and do something with that. The second test is to surpass limitations. And the lesson is that there's more to you than meets the eye, but you have to develop yourself. Because it's just because you have it, just because it's in there, doesn't mean you've won. You got to develop that thing that God gave you. And then the third test is to set the example. And the lesson is to live the standard even after you've reaped the fruit of it.